live. Oh, I need a light, but looks like we are good to go on Facebook, good to go on YouTube. Welcome in, everybody. We'll give you a minute or two to come on into the chat. As always, it is Tuesday night. My name is Connor Riley. I'm with Dog Nation, and we are here to talk some Georgia football. There is actual stuff to talk about right now. You had the schedule come out last night. You had we've gotten to talk to some players in Kirby Smart in recent days. Today we got to talk to Azeez Ojulari and Kobe Dean. Obviously, myself, Mike Griffith, Brandon Adams will have stories, and in Brandon's case, podcast tomorrow on sort of what has been said, what players are talking about. You know, there's been a lot of questions about Todd Monken's offense. We'll obviously get into that and what we've sort of been able to glean so far from some of these players and what they've had to say. From the defensive perspective, we got to talk to Richard LeCount, Eric Stokes, Azeez Ojulari, and Kobe Dean. On the offense side, two offensive linemen, Jamari Sire and Trey Hill, who both gave some really, I think, interesting insight into what this Georgia offense is going to look like this year. So obviously that'll sort of be our lead topic tonight. Last night you had the Georgia schedule come out. They opened with Arkansas. They closed with Vanderbilt. As I discussed with Mike Griffith on the beat last night, Georgia has a very tricky and I think tough October slate. Robert Moody, welcome in. George Wrigley, good to see you. Welcome in, guys. As always, it's our sort of Tuesday night chats here. Mike Griffith has Mondays and Fridays. Jeff gets Wednesdays. BA gets every day. We have Cover 4 on Thursday. So I'm here taking up your time on Tuesday night, sort of discussing everything that we've sort of been able to learn so far about Georgia football and what these next couple of days, weeks, and ultimately a month from now, what that first game looks like. So Jerry Popham, good to see you. Welcome in. Pete Ellis, good to see you from Flowery Branch. We'll probably give it another 30 seconds before people come in. Oh, man, we're having issues on YouTube. That's less than ideal. Matt Talley, good to see you. Welcome in. So let's see. Hopefully YouTube works out all right. Facebook seems to be going well. Rob Reynolds from Thomasville, North Carolina, good to see you. Hopefully we've got some from Thomasville, Georgia as well, the 229 down there. So all right, we're about 2:30 in. So, yeah, Jeffrey Rogers, grown man football in October. That's what Georgia's going to have to play if they're going to get through that stretch and ultimately get to where they want to at the end of the season, being the SEC championship game. Georgia's offense, new look this year, led by Todd Monken. What does it look like? What changes are made from last year with James Coley now out and Monken now in? You have new personnel in there in JT Daniels, Jamie Newman at quarterback. It'll look different. DeAndre Swift is gone. 3 out of the 5 starting offensive linemen from a year ago are gone, along with Cade Mace, who started a number of games for Georgia. It's going to be a drastically looking offense. First thing that I think it is important to know is that this offensive line has slimmed down a little bit. Now, it might not exactly be the sexiest thing in the world to talk about this offensive line and sort of what it means, given we talked a lot last year about how good Georgia's offensive line was supposed to be. And while it was very good, I wouldn't necessarily say it was all that much of a difference maker come Georgia's offense and end of the season. And ultimately, I think that's what an offensive line does. As good as one can be, ultimately it falls back on your skill players and your skill position guys sort of make those big plays and difference. And Georgia wasn't able to do that a year ago. But I start with the offensive line because both Trey Hill and Jamari Sire have talked about and mentioned, Sire, it was obvious how much weight he has sort of lost and how much better shape he is going into the season. I think Trey Hill is as well. Guys like Ben Cleveland, Justin Schaefer, when we get to see and hear from them, I imagine they're going to bring up sort of similar points there in the sense that I think it's more important this year that they are in sort of more athletic shape, better shape. They're able, in Trey Hill's words, to play faster, both in terms of, tempo and also in terms of getting to the second level, making those types of blocks. Because under Sam Pittman, his style of play, and you sort of saw this in recruiting too, and the guys that they tended to go after, they wanted those big mauler types. They were guys that they were just going to beat on you for 4 quarters, and by that 4th quarter, you were going to be worn out and sort of tire out. And while that worked for and won Georgia a lot of games, I do think we saw a little bit last year that sort of forces you to play one sort of way. And when you don't necessarily have the skill talent there that Georgia did a season ago, it does make things a little tougher to win with, and you can't necessarily be multiple and play in multiple ways. Georgia's still going to have a very strong and good offensive line, if not as nearly talented as it was a season ago. But now that this line has seemed to make an effort to slim down, to be a little bit more athletic. Jamari Sawyer, who was playing at 345 last year, is now all the way down to 315. Trey Hill's a guy who noticeably looked a little bit bigger than perhaps he should have been last season. He's, I think, in a better spot and better shape now. So you have these guys slimming down. What does that mean? Well, I think it means Georgia wants to be more vertical this year. I think last year a little bit, certainly with James Coley, especially with what we saw in the Notre Dame game, that Georgia offense wanted to be horizontal. They wanted to try to get you out on the perimeter in space and sort of beat you that way. And the reality is that they just lacked the sort of speed to be able to make that system work. So what does Todd Monken bring in? Well, we know from the NFL that he's a guy that he wants to take vertical shots downfield. He wants to stretch the field. And if you're George Pickens, I think this is very good news for you. He wants to target your best wide receivers and take those 15 to 20-yard chunk plays. That works very well with what Jamie Newman likes to do and the way his skill set sort of works. So it'll be interesting to see, especially depending on how this quarterback situation goes out. I think it'll be very interesting to see how Newman, or whoever that quarterback is, integrates into this offense, because I think we know there are some differences between Newman and Daniels. Newman has the bigger arm, the better athletic ability, whereas Daniels obviously coming off a knee injury and he's not yet fully cleared, but he is sort of the more precision passer that we saw, I think, in the form of Jake Fromm in the past couple of years. So it'll be very interesting and I think telling to see whoever wins that starting quarterback job, sort of what that says about the Georgia offense, because I don't believe these guys are all that similar in their skill sets. So, and one quote that I wanted to show you guys tonight, I'm pulling it up right now. Azeez Ojulari on the Georgia offense and what Todd Monken is bringing in. Quote, "Man, that offense is going to be good. We should come in working hard every day. We are following the coach's lead and doing whatever the coaches wanted us to do. So they're going to go out there and execute and do what they have to do." I think the first part of that quote there is he saying the offense is going to be good. Well, that looks nice in print. It is worth bringing up and reminding that a year ago, we were seeing a lot of the same things about James Coley, and there was an excitement. There was, he's going to bring new energy. He was going to bring sort of new stuff to this Georgia offense, and ultimately that ended up not sort of panning out over the course of the season. So right now, admittedly, I am a little bit skeptic about what we see from the Georgia offense this year, and until I see it on the field, then I'll be able to sort of see and know a little bit more about what we're getting with this offense. I see some comments coming in, sort of talking about Jamie Newman. Yeah, we had a story in a gallery go up yesterday on, Georgia's first day of practice. I'm trying to stop saying, Georgia's first day of practice, pictures, video. Jamie Newman, I just did it again. With his sleeves rolled up, he is a big, very physical dude. And Dwan Mathis as well, someone who has also gotten a lot of praise for the work that he has put in, and he's turned some heads this offseason about how physically gifted he is. I believe that in terms of raw, natural talent, Mathis might be the best guy in that room. Now, he needs to sort of translate and fine-tune some of those things to where it turns into being a very good player on the field. But even all that he has overcome just to get to this point, I think says a lot about the internal strength and the strength of Dwan Mathis's character and what he might be able to do. So we've got about the first 8-9 minutes there on the Georgia offense. I guess we're seeing some more questions now rolling about the schedule, so I figure this is a good time to transition to that schedule. Starts with Arkansas. Week 2, they go to Auburn. Santiago Diarn asking about if Georgia loses to Auburn week 2, does that mean the season is over? Santiago, you've been listening to BA a little bit too much here. BA always loves to hype up Auburn. He loves to talk about how Auburn is a tricky game and a tougher game than it might be. I actually think that Georgia getting Auburn in week 2 actually plays into Georgia's benefit this year. Yes, they have their own questions to deal with on the offensive side of the ball. Particularly, they're a lot bigger than what Auburn has. But Auburn has to replace Derek Brown and Marlon Davidson, two very good players in the defensive line. They have to replace their entire starting secondary from a season ago. They have to replace 4 of their 5 starters on the offensive line, all the while breaking in a new offensive coordinator in Chad Morris. I think by the end of the year, the Auburn team might be pretty good and make sort of those leaps and bounds that they need to challenge, especially Alabama at the end of the season with a very tough closing stretch of Tennessee, Auburn, Texas A&M, or Alabama, Texas A&M. But to start the season, I think Georgia catching them early is actually a break and a benefit for Georgia in this sense. Now, yes, it is a tough sort of 3-game stretch, 4 games there if you really include Kentucky, which I think that being the week after Alabama is tough, but their October slate of Auburn at home, Tennessee at home, at Alabama, at Tennessee, or at Kentucky, that is about as tough as a 4-game stretch as you'll find in the SEC this season. I don't expect Georgia to win all 4 of those games. As I wrote this morning on Good Day UGA, I do think Alabama gets Georgia when they play in Tuscaloosa. Alabama announced today that they're going to have about 20% capacity for fans in the stands this year. I would expect that Georgia is similar in that, and the rest of the SEC is similar in that. It seems it's sort of Alabama is trying to set the bar there when it comes to fan and stadium attendance this year for Georgia. I believe, if I'm doing the math correctly, it's about between 20 and 18,000 fans in the stands total. So it'll sort of be interesting to see where that goes and how that's impacted this year. But BA brought this up on his show today. I think it's going to be very hard for any team to go undefeated during the course of the season. A 10-game SEC schedule, even with it being, Georgia getting Arkansas and Mississippi State, I still think with what they have to play with Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida, all those games, really those games, that's Georgia's 5 straight games, 5 games in 6 weeks, with the Florida game coming after a bye week, and only those first 2 are at home. It's a tough schedule to get through, but I do think Georgia will have the ability to get to 9-1 come the end of the season. And once they sort of get through that Florida game, and that Florida game is once again, I think, going to be huge. But once they get through that Florida game on November 7th, they close at Missouri, Mississippi State at home, at South Carolina, Vanderbilt. So if Georgia can get through, I think, that opening stretch, the 5-1 record, they beat Florida, or they split, potentially with Alabama and Florida. If they beat Florida and they're 5-1 going into that Missouri game, I think that they can absolutely get to 9-1. They can be very well rested because the reality is they're just leaps and bounds better than every one of those last 4 teams that they play. And that should potentially set them up very nicely for an SEC championship game, assuming we have that this year. As I told BA this morning, I do think it's going to be Alabama and Georgia in the SEC championship game. Pay attention to Florida. There's a story that's sort of percolating out there. BA let his show with it this morning. But Florida's top 3 wide receivers, Kadarius Toney, Travion Grimes, and Jacob Copeland, all missed practice yesterday. And it sort of sounded as if maybe they might be considering sitting out the season for COVID or for whatever various reason that might be. And if they do that, that is a significant loss to the Florida offense because they're already losing 4 of the top 6 pass catchers from a season ago. So you factor that in. Georgia fans know very good and well the effect that losing that many top pass catchers from your team can have on your offense, because I think that's a big reason that Georgia struggled offensively a year ago with their wide receiver play. Georgia's clearly, I think, the more talented team than Florida this season. So if you're removing the maybe one spot on the team on the field where Georgia might be at a disadvantage across the position, Pickens, I think, is still the best wide receiver that either of those teams have. But to take that away from Florida puts even more on Kyle Trask, a guy a lot of people like, but nobody really loves. Nobody's standing on the table saying, hey, Kyle Trask, Heisman Trophy candidate, Heisman finalist, potential first-round draft pick. Kyle Trask is a nice quarterback, but he's not a guy that you're standing on the table screaming for. They're saying, this is a guy that I think can lead us to the promised land or the glory land. Whereas I think you do potentially have that with a guy like Jamie Newman and even a guy in JT Daniels. So I think Florida, if they don't get those players back, that's going to be make an already tough situation there in Florida this year, because I do believe they're under quite a bit of pressure to win this year and succeed this year under Dan Mullen. And if it doesn't happen this year, then you really start asking, well, when is it going to be? Because if he loses this year, it'll be 4 straight Florida losses to Georgia, something that has not happened since the 1980s. And it'll be 4 straight losses against. They were both head coaches going back to Mullen's final year at Mississippi State. So you factor those in there. And Florida, this is a really a tough season, not a tough season, but if they don't get those guys and they don't have those guys back, it's going to make things very interesting, I think, in Gainesville and Dan Mullen, what the future of that program looks like. Some other news and notes. I definitely think that Georgia, along with Alabama and LSU, the SEC sort of went out of its way maybe a little bit to protect them, or at least put them in a position where come the end of the season, they are playing for that SEC championship game. They are playing for that potential college football playoff game, which as of right now, the College Football Playoff Committee has come out and said that they do intend to, at least right now, follow what's out there, follow the protocol that's out there, and play the schedule that they are given. So I could very well see it being if let's say Alabama's undefeated going into that SEC championship game, which I do think they will be at that point, you could see Georgia win that game. You get Alabama and Georgia in the college football playoff. You get, say, the Big 12 champ, which will probably be either Oklahoma or Texas. I probably like Texas a little bit more there. And then you get Clemson out of the ACC. That's potentially your 4 playoff teams right there. I think the SEC sees an opportunity to get multiple teams into the playoff this year, and they think that Alabama, LSU, and Georgia have the best chance of being those teams, and you want them looking more impressive at the end of the season. So when Georgia plays Vanderbilt that last week of the season, when Alabama plays Arkansas that last week of the season, it's going to make things a little bit easier. Matt Talley, he brings up playing Sam Pittman. Azeez Ojulari talked about that tonight. Excited, looking forward to that. He's confident that Sam Pittman is going to have a sort of better team than people expect. And over the long haul, I do think Sam Pittman will be a good hire for Arkansas. But with who they have to play this year, their schedule, with them getting Georgia and Florida from the SEC East on top of playing the SEC West, that's just a real tough break for them. I'm going to set the over/under for their win total at half a win, and if they get to that and they get over that, that's a successful season in my book for Sam Pittman. But I think Pittman is going to be a guy they build for the long haul, and that is, I think, going to end up being a good hire for Georgia. Shelton Tucker saying you don't sound like you for the Dogs. I have them going 9-1 and winning the SEC East this year. I'm not necessarily for the Dogs, but I do think that Georgia's going to be a very, very good team again this year. I think, I don't know how great their offense is, but I do trust that there's enough talent on this team to figure it out and sort of solve the issues that we saw a year ago to an extent. I don't expect them to be the number 1 offense in the country like you saw with LSU last season, but I do think come the end of the season, I think Georgia's going to be in a better place offensively than they were a year ago, regardless of who that quarterback is. But I do think if I had to bet right now today, I think Newman is going to be that guy. I think they like what they've seen from him so far. He's well-liked by his teammates. There's a confidence about him that this is his time and he can be the guy that Georgia has. And I would bring up right now, JT Daniels not being fully cleared. I think it'll be interesting to see when he gets that clearance and sort of how he factors into that rotation in the quarterback room with him, and when he can be fully himself and fully confident in his knee, because he, for a long time, that did not necessarily that knee, there were still some question marks about it. So we'll sort of see how things go from there. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask away. Dogfan3 asks, do you think Florida will be undefeated when we play them? I know they play Texas A&M before Georgia, and I know they play LSU. They play LSU the same day that Georgia plays Alabama. So that October 17th date is going to be a very fun day in the SEC. Would not surprise me if we got a sort of doubleheader where you get Florida, LSU in the afternoon, Georgia, or vice versa. I think that could be a very fun day. I do think someone gets Florida. I don't know if A&M, I don't know if it's LSU. I wouldn't be shocked if Florida gets to that Georgia game undefeated, but I'm going to bet against it happening, especially with some of the turmoil we're seeing with Florida right now and how that might impact them. So if I had to bet, I do think at least those two teams end up getting in there with a 5-1 record. Shelton Tucker, Jamie Newman has been cleared. It's JT Daniels that has not been cleared. Newman had a foot injury this offseason, but by walk through 9 or 10, he was able to go out there and play. Steve Walden asking how the O-line competition is shaping up a left tackle specifically. I expect Jamari Sawyer, who I wrote about this today on Dog Nation. You can go read and check that story out. I expect him to be the starting left tackle. Sawyer did mention that he was moving around a bit and sort of playing in various positions, which I think he can possibly do. He started at right tackle, and if Cade Mays doesn't end up transferring out of Georgia, I think there's a good chance that's where Sawyer starts this season. But I think he's a capable left tackle, and I'm not saying he's going to be Andrew Thomas, but I expect him by the end of this year to be a very good player and talked about as one of the better offensive linemen in the SEC. As far as guards, I think to start the season, you're going to see in that we'll do the whole interior. You have Justin Schaefer, Trey Hill, Ben Cleveland at guard. They could mix it up in there. They have some nice bodies in there, guys like Warren Erickson and even a freshman, I think, in Tate Ratledge, and Cedric Von Prawn as well, who could come in and play those spots. The biggest question mark probably on the entire team, I think, is that right tackle spot. Who mans that? Georgia did get some good news in getting Broderick Jones back for the start of practice. He was going through it yesterday, as sort of Georgia video put out there showed us. Having him ready to go, I think, does sort of help the idea that he could potentially be your week one right tackle starter. Now, Georgia also has guys like Warren McClendon and Xavier Truss who sort of been through the program and been in the program before. But I think having all those guys healthy and ready to go, I think that does sort of help this team this season. Jerry Dogs fan asks, how confident are you that we play the whole schedule? I'm not. I think if we can get to if Georgia can and the other SEC schools, they can just get to game one and we sort of see how having students back on campus impacts things, and whether that means going to online learning or we're able to manage having students back on campus and players take things seriously. I know Kobe Dean challenged Georgia students today to wear masks, to practice social distancing, to do the things that sort of need to be done so that we can have a football season. So I think if we get to game one and we have game one, I do think there's a chance that we have a full season. And I think just getting to that first part will be the most difficult. Willie Gray Jr. asks, is Blaylock practicing? He, like Daniels, has not been fully cleared, but he is practicing, but I don't think he's full 100%, especially when the pads come on later this week in practice number 5. I don't think he's 100% full go in that aspect, but he is out there with the team and he is practicing. He's just not fully 100% cleared and ready to go. But for game one against Arkansas on September 26th, I do expect him to be out there. So Corey Jackson, you say the NCAA said there'd be no postseason. That's in other sports. The NCAA does not award a FBS football championship, so that is awarded by the College Football Playoff Committee. So if the College Football Playoff Committee decides to have a season, decides to have a college football playoff, which right now they said they have and plan on, then there will be a postseason there. So let's see. Any other questions, comments? Whipmaster Hart, do you think Milton will see the field at all? I think he's a little similar to Zamir White and what he brings to the team. I'm on record as saying I am as high on Kendall Milton and what he will potentially bring to Georgia in the future as anybody. But you have guys like Zamir, Kenny McIntosh, James Cook, guys who all do things a little bit similarly to Milton. I think Milton right now might be the biggest of the bunch and the most physical of the bunch. And over the course of an SEC season, that can get you onto the field and do some things for you. I don't expect him to be a 1,000-yard rusher, but does he have, I think, a season that Zamir White had last year where he finished around 400 yards? I could certainly see that from Kendall Milton as a freshman this year. Let's see. Any other questions? I guess we can talk about the Cade Mays thing here a little bit. Yesterday, the NCAA told Tennessee, and Jeremy Pruitt announced that Cade Mays will not be immediately eligible for this season. He is applying for a waiver to sort of get that push through. I know a lot of Georgia fans were admittedly happy to see that get denied. And BA spoke about this on his show this morning. I go back and forth on this. I do think it's not a great look when you have that many people celebrating a player not getting immediate eligibility. And I get that he didn't leave Georgia in a great situation when he was a guy who, as we've said before, was going to be the starting left tackle. You were a 2-year starter at Georgia. You were set up to have a big third year, and then you leave to go back to Tennessee. And there are legitimate reasons for that. You have, his brother there now. He's from there. And you have his parents suing the school over an incident that occurred when Mays was on a recruiting visit. So I do understand why Georgia fans have hard feelings and we're excited to sort of see that Mays will have to sit out a year. And on the one hand, I do get it. I don't think that right now, as it exists, you should have players who clearly have an opportunity at one school just have the ability to bail and go somewhere else. But on the other, I do think that maybe the NCAA, and we need to get to a point where if you don't feel comfortable at a school and things don't necessarily work out there, that you're okay and allowed to go play somewhere else for another year. And I know Tennessee fans are running, well, how did you guys get JT Daniels eligible? JT Daniels missed almost all of last season as he got hurt in the first half of the first game of the season. Mays, especially with a Mays being in conference as well, I just think it was a very different situation and story. Ultimately, I guess I'm okay with what the NCAA decided to do. My bigger issue is that the NCAA seems from case to case not sort of deciding with the same decision making every time. And the lack of uniformity, I think, is where the frustration for me on the NCAA comes in. And ultimately, I would like to see everyone sort of gets to transfer once policy. And that, I think, does open things up for potentially more situations like Mays. But that also might help a school like Georgia where they can come in and you can get a guy who can easily transfer into the program and have better success there. So, hold on. Nick Talon asked a very good question. Yeah, and Howard Lemon, the other frustrating thing is it seems like the quarterbacks always seem to get that sort of eligibility there. Matt Talley, it brings up Luke Ford. It sucks for Luke Ford, especially because he's not getting to play this year. And I know there was a question asking if I think the Big Ten's going to reverse course. I don't. Justin Fields starting that petition is very nice, and it's very cool to see him step up and be a leader and trying to get the season back. I know the parents, the athletic directors don't seem all that happy about what the Big Ten decided to do. But to me, I find it hard to see them reversing course and going the other way once they've already sort of stuck their feet in the ground and said, this is the decision that we're going to have. And it's very unfortunate for the Big Ten players. It's certainly frustrating when the Big Ten doesn't seem to want to show their work and show and fully explain, hey, this is why we don't think it's safe to have a season. And there's a difference between the Pac-12 and that right now 9 of the 12 Pac-12 schools aren't having students on campus at all, not even making an effort to do that. And I think it's becoming more clear that for those Pac-12 institutions, football and athletics are not necessarily thought of in the same light as they are in other parts of the country. The Big Ten, though, Michigan State, for example, Michigan State is having intramurals on campus. Non-student athletes can go out there and play flag football, ultimate frisbee, things like that. But they can't have a football season. And I think ultimately the frustrating thing that I think a lot of people want to see is, and the Big Ten just has not done this yet, is what led you to come to this decision? Because the numbers with regards to COVID haven't changed. It hasn't all of a sudden become more deadly. We aren't, as of right now, seeing a dramatic spike across the country when it comes to this virus being more transferable. So I think the lack of transparency there is really hurting the Big Ten and making it harder. Nick Talon, I'll answer this question now. What is the non-UGA game that I'm most excited about? I think within the SEC and sort of outside of the SEC, I think Clemson Notre Dame, that game's at Notre Dame, could be a little bit of a fun watch. Georgia does play Florida on that same November 7th date. I think Alabama LSU is always a great game, just while it won't be in a full stadium this year, and with it being in Baton Rouge, I think that's a little unfortunate given what transpired there last year. But that is always a great game and a fun watch. Georgia plays Missouri that day, so hopefully that LSU game is at a time where we're actually able to watch it. I think an interesting week one game, the week one game that caught my eye the most, Auburn, Kentucky. Kentucky is a physical team. They are not necessarily going to roll over and sort of be the Kentucky of old. I don't know what their ceiling is, but they are at the very least going to be a good football team. And if Auburn's not ready to go week one, and they have some of the questions that we discussed earlier when talking about Georgia playing them, if they don't answer those against Kentucky, there's a very real world where Auburn starts 0-2, and that is not something you want to do. So it'll be interesting to see there what sort of happens. Chris Martell, Pickens, obviously the number one wide receiver. Who are the 2 and 3? I think to start the season, it'll be Dominic Blaylock, who I expect to be healthy and fully ready to go. And then you have Demetrius Robertson as well. Now, over the course of the season, it would not surprise me to see a guy like Jermaine Burton or Marcus Rosemy sort of emerge at that position, do a little better. Yeah, Christopher says Tennessee, 25% capacity for their home games. I imagine that's what it's going to be for Georgia, between 25 and 20%. Probably, if I'm guesstimating here, between 18 and 22,000 fans, assuming we get to that point. So it'll be interesting to see sort of when that decision comes out and what UGA's explanation is for that. Frank DiCarlo says Auburn comes out hot and says Georgia will play Auburn in the SEC championship game. That's a bold prediction, Frank. We like those around here. discussing those sort of things. We've got about the 30-minute mark, so we'll do the Brandon Adams. We'll give you about 5 good minutes of questions and comments. Elite GB, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's the chance that Georgia goes 10-0 realistically? 10 being very likely, 1 being very unlikely. I'll say a 4, maybe a 3.5 is where I come in there. Georgia's clearly a talented team. Other than Alabama, I think there's a very easy case to be made that there's a very noticeable talent gap between them and every team they play on their schedule. Alabama does have some questions, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And with that game not being at full capacity in Tuscaloosa, while it's 20,000 fans, I don't expect it to be anywhere near as loud as it was a season ago. And if Georgia's able to get through Auburn and Tennessee and they win that Alabama game, if they win that Alabama game, I think there's an excellent chance that they go undefeated. Them having that bye week between Kentucky and Florida, I think, is going to allow them to sort of reset everything and get right and better to go. And Green Soldier saying 4 oomph. It's really hard with this 10-game schedule, I think, to see teams going fully undefeated. 9-1 even potentially feels a little unrealistic, quite frankly. But I give Alabama a 6 and sort of say, between Georgia and Alabama, that sort of splits the difference. Howard Lemon, why is everyone giving Bama so much benefit of the doubt? They've won 5 national titles under Nick Saban. They're still recruiting at an incredibly elite level. They still have, on this team in particular, a very good offensive line. An offensive line, I think, an unbiased person would admit right now, they seem more confident in than what Georgia has. You bring in a guy like Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, 2 very, very good wide receivers who can, I think, replace some of the production that they lose with Judy and Ruggs. Najee Harris, as much as we like Zamir White, Kenna Moulton, Kenny McIntosh out here, Najee Harris is better than any running back Georgia has. Najee Harris, in my opinion, is the best running back in the country. And I think chiefly Georgia has to figure out a way to slow him down and contain him, because I think if Alabama had figured out that he was their best player against LSU a season ago, that makes that game very different for them. And they still have talent on defense. You bring back a guy like Dylan Moses. You have Patrick Surtain back there as a cornerback. They still have dudes up there up front who can play. Now, they're all very young and inexperienced and haven't necessarily proven it yet. But year over year, we've seen with Alabama, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt because more often than not, they are one of the 4 best teams in college football. I did see a question. Kevin went, how are you feeling about Keely Ringo freshman year with our deep DB core? So Keely Ringo had shoulder surgery this past week. Based on my reading of the green and the way Kirby Smart put it, I would not expect to see Keely Ringo at all this year. He did not sort of give any sort of timeline. It sounded like it was a more serious shoulder surgery than maybe necessarily, like, say, an AC joint where it just popped out, potentially a labrum injury. I would not expect to see Keely Ringo there. So with that being said, I think Georgia's secondary depth is still good enough to where losing the number 1 defensive back in the country won't hurt it all that much. Obviously, there's a ton of talent at cornerback with Eric Stokes, Tyson Campbell, DJ Daniel. Safety is set with Richard LeCount and Louis Cena. While the depth might not be great there, those are still as too good of a safety as you can ask for. You have guys like Mark Webb and Tyreek Stevenson to sort of man that star dime package look there. You have just a ton of talent there, in addition to a guy like Jalen Kimber, who I think eventually is going to be a very good player for Georgia as well. So you have all that talent in there. While, yes, losing Ringo does hurt, Georgia secondary is still the best, in my opinion, secondary in the country, even without him. Chris Martell asks, who replaces Hot Rod? I'll say Jared Zirkle, just because until I see Kirby trot Jake Camarda out there, I don't believe that we're going to put Georgia's going to put Camarda on both kicking and punting duties. I think they want to potentially manage his legs, so it'll be interesting to see sort of how that plays out. And Zirkle, he's never kicked in a college game before, and that's interesting and tough. So that it'll be very interesting to see. And hopefully my own feelings on this is that because of the uncertainty that you have with no longer having a kicker like Rodrigo, is that maybe you are a bit more aggressive on 4th downs and in those 4th and medium situations to where, hey, yeah, it's easy to just go ahead and take the 3 points. But why do that when we can, why trot out a kicker you're not fully confident in? and when you can just pick up 5-6 yards and get another first down and give yourself a better chance at scoring touchdowns. I think Georgia, one of the things they have to do a better job this year is kicking less field goals and scoring more touchdowns. They're able to do that. That potentially over the course of the season makes up the difference in points that they need to sort of beat Alabama in the SEC championship game, which I ultimately think that's how Georgia's December season ends. I do think while they lose that first game in Alabama, I think over the course of the season, especially those final 4 games, to sort of tie everything together that we've talked about with the schedule and the offense tonight, I think that they're going to be able to figure it out. Those last 4 games are really going to allow them to figure out this offense, to get it executing at the best level possible, and get them to a point where they are able to, in Atlanta and Mercedes-Benz Stadium, beat Alabama, and in my opinion, a 10-1 SEC champion and maybe even a 10-1 SEC runner-up. Both those teams potentially get into the college football playoff this year. Dwayne Dwyer, does Georgia have a 1,000-yard rusher under a new coordinator and adjusted schedule? I think that Zamir White will get to 1,000 yards. I will not say 1,200 like I think a lot of people were predicting or hypothetically asking about before the season when it was a 12-game schedule. But I do think we can see Zamir get to 1,000 yards this year. It will take some time, and a lot of that I think will come in the back half of the season. But I think ultimately they get there. I want one more good question. One more good question, and we'll call it a night after that. Let's see. Avery Swan, I'm looking. Who's returning kickoffs and punts? It would have been Dominic Blaylock if he were healthy, given he was doing that a season ago. But given his knee injury, I'm not totally sure where he stands with that. I think you could certainly see Kyrus Jackson do it, though, given we did see that a little bit a season ago. I think maybe even a guy like James Cook and Demetrius Robertson. I think the X factor or sort of dark horse to watch for at that spot, Avery, is Aryan Smith. Now, he's had meniscus surgery and he had wrist surgery as well coming into Georgia. So the health is a factor there. But in terms of pure speed and the ability to flip the field, Georgia does not have a guy that can do that, I think, better than Aryan Smith. And if he's able to get healthy and show in camp in these next 24, I guess now 23 practices, if he's able to show that, I think it's going to go a long way in making Georgia a difference maker, and Smith in particular, with guys like Burton and Rosemead and potentially even Justin Robinson as well ahead of him on the wide receiver depth chart. Kick and punt returns are how Aryan Smith potentially makes an impact on this freshman team, or on the team this freshman year. Robert Reynolds asked, does Ringo take a medical redshirt? I would venture to guess that's what he ends up doing. So, and Frank DeCall asked, will Kirby trust a freshman? He trusted Dominic Blaylock a season ago, so we have seen him put a sort of freshman back out there. So, Green Soldier asked, what is the second – and this will be the last question. We'll give it to Green Soldier. We haven't exactly seen him on Dog Nation Daily a lot, but that's because he's off busy saving the world and protecting the world. So we'll give it to him, Green right here. What is the second most dangerous game this season? Florida, or what about Auburn early? I'm going to go a little off the board here because I've already said that I think Alabama beats Georgia when they play October 17th. And Alabama will be favored in that game. I'll be very interested to see how Georgia responds to that game and that potential loss with a road trip to Kentucky next week. Because Kentucky, as we mentioned, they're a physical team. They're a tough team. I think playing them on the road, that's not necessarily something you want to do. And you hear college football coaches and coaches in general talk a lot about how you can't let one loss turn into two losses. I do wonder if Georgia potentially has any sort of Alabama hangover effect. I do expect that to be a close game. I wonder if the loss from that game maybe doesn't have Georgia's eye totally on the ball against Kentucky. I think that is a sneaky tough game for Georgia this year. With Georgia and Florida bye, that makes it easy. With Georgia getting Auburn after an essential bye in Arkansas, I think that makes things easy there. But Kentucky, with where it falls on the schedule, I think that is in terms of they're not the toughest opponent that Georgia will play, but in terms of a dangerous game where Georgia can get tripped up and where they can have a loss as a favorite, I think that Kentucky game is the one to watch out for. So, everyone, it's great talking to you tonight. We've got Before the Hedges tomorrow with Jeff Sintel at 6:30, 6:15-ish. Cover 4 on Thursday at 6. We will obviously have a ton to talk about You have Mike Griffith Friday nights at 8. And you have BA every Monday through Friday. We'll have more coverage this week with Georgia players and coaches and what they have to say. So it'll be very interesting to see what they continue to say and talk about as, one, players and players get more used to and adjusted to students coming back on campus and the danger that presents when it comes to COVID-19, as well as how they're adjusting to the new systems this season. So, as always, it was great talking to you guys. I will see you when I see you, I guess, which will be cover 4. But have a great Tuesday night, everybody.